The Bible is the most historically accurate book ever penned.
Yeah. No it isn't. Hey everyone, JL here, and welcome back to Bridge the Divide, where I examine irrational beliefs, the irrational behaviors that typically follow, and how we can mend the societal divisions that they create. Recently, while discussing the historicity of the Bible in a super fun, totally non-toxic, and in no way full of white nationalist, microphallist, homophobic, theist community on Discord, one of these individuals sent me a link to a video by a channel called World Video Bible School. In this video, Christian apologist and smug picket fence post Kyle Butt
You serious?
claims with all the condescension of a political cartoon that the following 9 items are not only proof that the Bible is the most historically accurate book ever written, but also of its absolute divinity. Now, before we begin, I do hope you're comfortable because this video is a little on the long side. I tried to make it as humorous as possible, but if you get bored, I will not take it personally. Take it away, Mr. Butt. I apologize for these guys. Please, continue.
Number 1, the Pilot Inscription. In 1961, in an Italian-sponsored dig in Caesarea, archaeologists uncovered a stone that had a Latin inscription on it that said Pontius Pilatus, prefect of Judea. That Pilate is mentioned in the gospel accounts on several occasions. You read in John 19:29.
I'm sure he meant 1829, because 1929 was all about giving Christ a sponge soaked in wine vinegar while he was hanging there crucified. Yep. Wine vinegar face.
Pilate then went out to them and said, "What accusation do you bring against this man?" The find verifying the New Testament statement that Pilate was the prefect of Judea.
Technically, it wasn't this stone that confirmed Pilate to be the prefect of Judea. It was actually the coins that he had minted during his reign. Currently located at the Israel Museum in Jerusalem, the Pilate stone was discovered by a team led by Dr. Antonio Frova while excavating an ancient theater built under the rule of Herod the Great. The artifact was possibly a fragment of a dedicatory inscription from a possible temple that honored Emperor Tiberius. After this, the stone was reused as a building block for a set of stairs set behind the Herodian theater. Very little is actually known about Pilate before or after he became prefect, and while he is mentioned greatly in the Gospels and briefly in Acts and 1 Timothy, the Pilate stone inscription itself is actually incomplete. The conclusion that the stone actually mentions Pilate is completely conjectural and is based solely upon the location that the stone was discovered.
Discovery number 2, Hezekiahs Tunnel. In 2 Chronicles 32:30, we read a statement that says, "This same Hezekiah also stopped the water outlet of Upper Gihon and brought the water by tunnel to the west side of the city of David." You would think that if a king had dug a tunnel under Jerusalem, we would be able to find it, and that's exactly what we find. A huge tunnel that matches perfectly the biblical description of Hezekiah's Tunnel.
First discovered in 1625 and then later explored in 1838 and 1865, the tunnel, also known as the Siloam Tunnel, was a water channel that was carved beneath the city of David in eastern Jerusalem, purportedly in preparation for a siege from King Sennacherib of the Assyrians. It was initially hypothesized that the tunnel dated from the reign of Hezekiah of Judah in the late 8th and early 7th centuries. everything that was accepted about the tunnel came directly from the Bible until 2011, when later excavation work and pottery analysis cast doubts on the dating of the tunnel to Hezekiah, pushing it back to late 9th to early 8th century, and that the biblical conduit that is mentioned in 2 Kings may actually refer to waterworks already located in the Mamilla area. Given this new evidence, it has been speculated that what was written was intended to help inflate the greatness of Hezekiah by taking away accomplishment from his father Ahaz, who was depicted as an evil king in 2 Kings 16:2.
Discovery number 3, the Taylor Prism. In 1830, a man by the name of Robert Taylor uncovered a 15-inch tall clay cylinder. There are 500 lines of written text on this clay cylinder, and it was put there by a man named Sennacherib. Well, Sennacherib was a king of Assyria that you read about in the Bible. On the clay cylinder, here's what Sennacherib said. As to Hezekiah the Jew, he didn't submit to my yoke. I laid siege to 46 of his strong cities, walled forts, and to the countless small villages in their vicinity, and conquered them by means of well-stamped earth ramps and battering rams. It's interesting when you compare Sennacherib's statement of what he did with the biblical statement of what he did. In 2 Chronicles 32:1, we read, Sennacherib, king of Assyria, came and entered Judah. He encamped against the fortified cities, exactly like Sennacherib says he did.
The Taylor Prism is actually one of 3 prisms that make up Sennacherib's annals. The other 2 are the Oriental Institute Prism and the Jerusalem Prism. Carved in Akkadian cuneiform, they detail Sennacherib's history and campaigns. Unfortunately, Mr. Butt fails to go just a touch further with his cherry-picked quotes. Yes, the Bible and the Prism both confirm that Sennacherib attacked Jerusalem. Read a little further, however, and the accounts diverge dramatically, with Sennacherib basically boasting that he completely whooped Hezekiah's ass, took his money, and left him walled within his city like a caged bird. While the Bible states that overnight, an angel came down and killed 185,000 Assyrian troops before they could sack Jerusalem. However, the annals make no mention of these deaths or any attempt to even sack Jerusalem, only that Sennacherib seemed perfectly happy to surround Jerusalem with his encampments, gift the surrounding towns that he captured to his allies, and leave Hezekiah trapped within the walls to rot.
Discovery number 4, the David Inscription. For many years, people said that David was a figment of the Israelite imagination because no archaeological finds had been discovered that verified his existence. And yet, in 1993, in Tel Dan, there was a man who was working named Abraham Byron who discovered a stone, and on that stone was the inscription of an Israelite king from the house of David. The Bible uses that very designation in 1 Kings 12, verse 19. The David inscription validated the biblical text.
This one is actually surrounded by intense dispute, and it all comes down to the various attempts to interpret the inscriptions on a heavily damaged and cracked stone that was originally found in 3 fragments. There are widespread disagreements on how the 3 stones actually fit together, the translations of this particular dialect of Aramaic, the spacing within the wording, the direct authorship, the actual dating of the stone, and even if it is or is not a modern forgery.
Number 5, the Moabite Stone. Found in 1868, it's a black basalt stone that measures about 3.5 feet high, 2 feet wide. On that stone, Mesha, the king of Moab, cut lines of text in about 850 BC. Mesha mentions that Omri was the king of Israel who had oppressed Moab, but then Mesha says he saw his desire upon Omri's son and upon his house. The Mesha stone cites Omri as the king of Israel, just as 1 Kings 16:21 through 28 indicates.
Also called the Mesha Stele, Kyle fails to mention two major points. The first is that the stele predates the writings of Jeremiah by almost 300 years, meaning the stele doesn't confirm the accuracy of the Bible, just that the stele was repeated in the Bible, possibly because Jeremiah read the stele himself or heard about what it said via oral tradition and presumed it was a direct historical account. The second, and most important, is that Kyle is disregarding the evidence-backed proposition that the inscription on the stone was not historical, but allegorical, as it was at the time a substantial literary tradition of telling legends about kings of the past. Regardless, there is widespread disagreement on the actual translations of the stone itself. While biblical archaeologists universally agree that the artifact is authentic from its time period, exactly what is depicted on the heavily damaged inscriptions is not readily agreed upon.
Number 6, the Nazareth House. In 2008, a skeptic named Rene Salm wrote a book that he claimed destroyed Christianity once and for all.
It's interesting that Kyle would take time to denounce Salm's book. In a nutshell, Salm presents an evidence-backed, deeply critical evaluation of the archaeology committed to confirming the town of Nazareth, concluding that it wasn't even founded until around 70 AD, almost 4 decades after the death of Christ. While such a thing wouldn't really destroy Christianity, it would cast heavy doubt upon the already highly subjective nature of the Bible's creation. I strongly suggest Salm's work if you have an interest in history or archaeology.
He said that Jesus could not have existed because there was no town of Nazareth in the first century. In 2009, an archaeological discovery was announced that they had found a small house in Nazareth that dated to the first century. The house was only about 900 feet square total, but it was large enough to provide evidence of the Bible's accuracy.
All of that is completely unfounded. More precisely, the house, and I use that term loosely, was first discovered by nuns in the 1880s and then was dated by Ken Dark and his team to the 1st century in 2006. Here is where Kyle gets a little loose with his timeline. The 1st century ran from 180 to 100 AD. Christ supposedly lived around 4 BC to 33 AD. The first Jewish war took place from 66 AD to 73 AD. And evidence supports that Nazareth was most likely founded around 70 AD. So when Kyle says that the house dated to the 1st century, there are literally 100 years of time in which the house could have been built. Concluding that it was the house that Jesus actually lived in is just baseless speculation.
Number 7, the Cyrus Cylinder. In 1879, Hormuz Rassam found a small clay cylinder. It's about 9 inches long, and it's now in the British Museum of Natural History. In the ancient city of Babylon, he uncovered this, and this clay cylinder was commissioned by King Cyrus. And it had an inscription on it about his victory over the city of Babylon and his policy toward the nations he had captured. And the text said, "I returned to these sacred cities on the other side of the Tigris, the sanctuaries of which have been in ruins for a long time, the images which used to live therein, and established for them permanent sanctuaries." The policy, often hailed as Cyrus's Declaration of Human Rights, coincides perfectly with the biblical account of the ruler's actions, in which Cyrus decreed that the temple in Jerusalem would be rebuilt and that all the exiled Israelites who wished to join in the venture had his permission and blessings to do so. You'd read that in Ezra chapter 1, verses 1 through 11. This little 9-inch long clay cylinder stands as impressive testimony that validates the biblical accuracy.
Kyle, you've got to stop talking out of your, well, you know. In Mesopotamia, it was a long-held tradition that newly established kings would kick off their reign with a sort of statement of their rules and reform changes over those of the previous ruler. The Cyrus Cylinder is one such declaration, the Akkadian cuneiform script establishing the legitimacy of Cyrus's reign and all the new changes that he intended to make. All in all, it was quite progressive and is seen as one of the first acknowledgments of universal human rights in a kingdom that had become a veritable melting pot. Unfortunately, nowhere in the script does it mention the Jews, Judea, or even Jerusalem. It only mentions Mesopotamian sanctuaries and the repatriation of deported peoples. It could be that the Jews, having been held captive in Babylon, were included among all the others being repatriated in this progressive initiative, but nowhere on the cylinder does it even imply that Cyrus was directly referring to the Jews. This would be a direct contradiction to Isaiah 45:1, which actually refers to Cyrus as a Messiah or anointed one, the only non-Jew to be referred to as such. In truth, the profound success of Cyrus the Great, who founded the First Persian Empire, is largely attributed to Cyrus's deeply abiding respect for the customs and religions of the lands he conquered.
Number 8. The discovery of the Pool of Siloam. In 2004, a majestic stepped entrance to the Pool of Siloam was uncovered in the area known as the City of David. In John chapter 9, verse 7, we read that Jesus said to a blind man, "Go wash in the Pool of Siloam," which is translated sent. So he went and washed and came back seeing. Validation once again of the biblical accuracy.
The Pool of Siloam was a rock-cut pool on the southern side of the city of David, considered by some archaeologists as the original site of Jerusalem. The pool was fed by the Gihon spring, which ran through, you guessed it, the Siloam Tunnel. It is widely accepted that the Pool of Siloam was extremely popular among the population. Everyone went there, so finding a reference to it in the Bible is not all that surprising. What is surprising is Kyle concluding that this mere reference in the Gospel of John confirms both that a miracle was performed by and the literal divinity of Jesus Christ. That's a leap even Sam Beckett wouldn't make.
Number 9, the Hittite Tablets. For many years, people made fun of the biblical text and said it mentioned people and places that never did exist. One of those groups was the nation of the Hittites. But in 1906, Hugo Winkler was doing some excavation in the Turkish city of Baghdaz Koy. There he uncovered 10,000 clay tablets that documented the history of the Hittite nation, and they discovered that that area was the capital of the Hittite nation. In Joshua chapter 11, we read about the Canaanites in the east and the west, and the Amorite and the Hittite. In 1906, Hugo Winkler discovered the Hittite nation that the Bible had mentioned some 3,000 years before.
Okay, hang with me here. We're going to go kind of deep. A major issue here is that there are actually two groups of people called Hittites. There are the historical Hittites, who were an Anatolian people who established the kingdom of Hattusa in Anatolia around 1680 to 1650 BCE. Cuneiform texts found in the area of their kingdom, as well as diplomatic correspondence found in Assyrian, Egyptian, and Babylonian archives, help us to verify the details of their civilization. And then there are the biblical Hittites, who are a tribe of people descended from Noah and described as living in or near Canaan between Abraham and Ezra, or roughly 2000 BCE to 1500 BCE. They are mentioned several times throughout the Tanakh as the adversaries of the Israelites and their God Yahweh. Now, how exactly the two depictions overlap, or even if they do, is up for major debate. We do know that the historical Hittites were actually in widespread conflict with everyone in the area over control of the Near East, and that Hittite mythology holds no mention of Noah and was actually heavily influenced by their Mesopotamian and Hurrian counterparts, as well as some Indo-European influence. From the biblical text, it mentions people called Hittites, but it's likely from an historical perspective that these were probably individuals who lived in the far-scattered Syro-Hittite groupings that cropped up after the Assyrian Empire conquered and annexed much of the Hittite Empire. Strangely, for a group of people considered enemies of Yahweh, the Bible makes no mention of the Hittite capital Hattusa or even its king, Muwatalli II. And just because a German archaeologist discovered the city of Hattusa in excavations between 1906 and 1912 does not confirm the depictions of the Hittites in the Bible, or even that the individuals addressed therein were actual historical Hittites. So pretty much all we have here is a massive load of what comes out of Mr. Butt's butt.
I thought my jokes were bad.
Now, I can't say definitively that Mr. Butt here was just whittling down the chosen points for the sake of time, or deliberately cherry-picking the actual data to help support his biblical narrative.
Man, making decisions is so hard.
Either way, when we take the scriptures that Kyle cited in this video, and we put them up against the actual archaeological investigations of the last 2 centuries, we can see that Kyle here left out some decidedly important information. Biblical and secular historians generally agree that the further back the writings, the less accurate that they likely are. While the oral traditions continued on in Aramaic, there were likely great changes in the information.
So we're gonna play telephone.
Which most likely resulted in much of the information being lost, forgotten, exaggerated over time, or merely misremembered. As the time periods that are being analyzed move forward, there are several historical events and places that do line up when compared with historical documentation from the surrounding empires. But even these, especially the Gospels themselves, are rife with exaggerations, discrepancies, and accounts that conflict with archaeological history. I mean, can we talk about the lack of overlap between the census of Quirinius and the reign of Herod the Great, who figures quite largely in the Gospel of Matthew, who in fact died 10 years before the actual census even took place, not the fake one mentioned in the Gospel of Luke? I mean, am I right, huh? Okay. Suffice to say, when learning history, the Bible is rather limited in its veracity, and it should not be your only source. Best to seek out every source you can, then line them up to see what details coincide. While we may never get a clear picture of the past, it's a safe bet that if multiple separate cultures recorded the exact same events around the same time, you're most likely on the right path.
This is the way.
Thank you so much for joining me for this massive debunk of Kyle Butt's biblical historicity claims. If it's your first time here, please like and subscribe and hit that bell for notifications. I'm closing in on 1,000, and I hope you can help me get there. As always, any and all feedback is welcomed. I am always looking to improve my work, and I love interacting with you all in the comments. On a lighter note, if you happen to love horror movies, check out our podcast, Week in Horror, where me and my filmmaker friends deep dive into horror films that released that week in horror history. Links to everything are in the description. Thank you all again. And remember, be safe, be excellent to each other, and together we can bridge the divide. His name is Kyle Butt? Is it like a butt? Are you fucking kidding me? Hello, my name is Mr. Butt. Hey, a butt! Kyle Butt. Where the fuck was your god that day?